Hello and welcome to Brokenomics number I can't remember, but this one is going to be all about the debt ceiling, which is a bit of a live issue in the US at the moment because there's a bit of an ongoing debate now. We tend to film these with a slight lag, so it's possible that by the time you see this, there has been some sort of deal done on it, but nevertheless, we're going to get into the background of it, why it's important, and then the second order effects on the geopolitical stage, which are actually far more significant than just the principal issue by itself. So starting off with the US debt ceiling, what is it? Well, the US didn't used to have one. They always used to basically agree each issuance of debt on its own merits, one at a time. And that was a bit of a slow, tedious process. And so during the First World War, they decided that they wanted something which was a bit more flexible, something a bit faster. So in 1917, there was the Second Liberty Bond Act. And what that did is it set an aggregate level of debt, so effectively a ceiling, the amount that could be issued. And then the Treasury basically had discretion to borrow up to that amount. So they could basically just raise the limit every time that they wanted to do it. Now, there has been frequent changes to this debt ceiling, as you can imagine, especially since the amount of inflation there's been since 1917. In fact, this debt ceiling, it's been raised, extended, or suspended over 100 times at this point since 1917, and the frequency of those changes is speeding up. They're becoming quicker now because, of course, with the amount of inflation there is the need to do it. Well, plus and the level of government spending that the US takes on these days. So there's a lot of that. There's always been a bit of a legal debate over it because under the US Constitution, only the Congress has the power to borrow. So does the Congress setting a debt limit, a debt ceiling, really hold water in a legal sense? Bit of a debate, but I mean, it's been this case for over 100 years now. So you would have thought if the legal minds were going to weigh on this conclusively, they would have done so at this point. And the implications of this ongoing debate are, of course, fascinating. It's crucial for the operation of the government in its current form, which is an overspending government. And we get into a nice big ding-dong every few years with the government batting around between the two political parties as to whether they're going to raise it or not. So let's get into the current nature of the debt ceiling. And also, let's talk about abusive relationships, because that's basically what's happening here. I'm going to start with this graph from the Visual Capitalist that you'll be seeing on the screen. And what this does is it is showing you a visualization of the amount of US debt that is out there. So you start off or if you're listening to this, it starts off with somebody holding a $1 bill. You can imagine that, and then it shows various amounts going up to $1 million, which you need a pallet for, the pallet like you might move goods around on. It goes up to 10 million, which is, size of a truck trailer, something like that. It shows $1 billion, which sort of takes up an entire sports field, a bit more. It shows $1 trillion, which is truly a vast amount of money, and you're getting up to large building sizes by this point. So stacks of dollars. The graphic, if you can't see it, if you're listening to this, they put it next to a 747, and the 747 is completely dwarfed by it. But that's not the amount of debt that the US actually has at the moment. The US actually has 31 trillion, which is skyscraper size multiple times over. So this is a handy visualization for the amount of debt that is out there. An extraordinary sum of money. So how are the Fed trying to respond to this vast amount of debt? And how are they trying to respond to the fact that the US is basically running out of money at this point because they're getting squeezed, and we go into that? Well, they're doing it by trying to lower inflation, which is a result of their previous money printing to bail them out of previous debt issues, which is destroying the economy, which is lowering taxes. So this has got the US into a proper mess. So let's put this into perspective, because I've given loads of these sort of presentations over the years, and you put the charts up with all the numbers, and people sort of smile and nod and say, "Oh yeah, that's fantastic, makes a lot of sense," and then they've forgotten it all like 5 minutes after you've told them. I find the only way that this really sticks is if you boil the whole thing down to the scale of an individual. So let me tell you about an individual let's call him Bob. And Bob is a avatar of the US government. Now, Bob has $680 in the bank. Okay, that's the equivalent to the amount of money that the US has in its bank. But Bob has credit card debt of $250,000, which is not good. He's having to pay $7,000 in credit card payments every year on this, and that's rising. The good news, however, is that Bob has an income of about $36,000 a year, so he can cover his interest payments. But the problem is that he's not just paying his credit card payment, he's spending out for other things, such as Social Security and a large military and all those other things that Bob has to pay. In fact, his total spending is about $47,000 a year. So, here's Bob. He's earning 36, and he's spending 47 a year. So clearly, this isn't viable. And if it really was an individual that we're talking about, you would quite sensibly say that Bob is a bit of a lunatic and he needs to trim his spending. But of course, Bob isn't Bob. Bob is actually an avatar of the US government, and they are spending far more than they take in, and they're racking up massive amounts of debt. Just to bear with the Bob analogy slightly longer, Bob has actually, as well as his $250,000 in debt that he's racked up already, he's actually promised to take on an additional $1.5 million in debt. And he's done that largely through promises to pay Social Security and Medicare to the large boomer generation who is currently in the process of retiring at a rate of knots at the moment. So as you can see, it's just a complete nonsense. And when you put it in the human scale, you can see the scale of the problem that the US has. So you might reasonably ask, what has the US got in exchange for all this vast quantity of debt? Now, despite what the politicians are going to tell you, what they've really got is a whole load of vote buying and wars. Now, it feels to me that something really changed after 9/11. And that was the moment where this sort of festering, noxious evil in the heart of the American deep state achieved its final form. Now, maybe it goes back much longer than that, and I'm just not old enough to see any further back than that. But the US has become extremely war happy, and other social programs, which we talk about, in particular, if you could call it that, lockdowns have had a ruinous effect. But let's just stick with the war aspect of this for the moment. Take a look at this article. This is an article from Zero Hedge. They're talking about the post 9/11 US conflicts have probably killed over 4.5 million people. They say the post 9/11 wars on terror may have caused at least 4.5 million deaths in around half a dozen countries. The new report from apparently Brown University and a couple of other places show the effect of this. And it's people killed both directly and indirectly by the war on terror in Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, Pakistan, Somalia, Syria, and Yemen. They say since 2010, a team of 50 scholars and legal experts have been participating in the Cost of War project, keeping their own calculations. And according to their latest assessment, 900,000 people, including 400,000 civilians, died from post 9/11 wars. Another 38 million people have been displaced or made refugees. The US federal government, meanwhile, has spent over $8 trillion on these wars. Right. So, $8 trillion on wars. The scamdemic, that cost them another $6 trillion. Let's shut down the economy and funnel vast amounts of money to, both our friends and people who were gaming the system. In order to get stimmy checks and COVID relief through businesses. It's a whole other subject, but a lot of those, when you do money laundering, for example, you set up a whole load of shell companies. And so you've got a lot of Eastern European, for example, criminal gangs who will have dozens and dozens of shell companies across the US, and each of them were eligible for COVID relief. So you can understand how. Oh, and by the way, I don't think they checked anything below 4 million claims on these. So you can see that the vast amount of money that the US wasted, not only in wars, but in the scamdemic as well. And you didn't get anything for that debt, and actually you got less than nothing because, of course, you drove a vast amount of refugees out of those countries, which then went on to destabilize Europe and lead to all sorts of problems that Europe is having now. I'll just close out with another paragraph from this article while I'm having a bit of a rant. One 2012 study found that more than half the babies born in the city of Fallujah in Iraq between 2007 and 2010 had birth defects. Amongst the pregnant women surveyed, more than 45% experienced miscarriages in the 2-year period. Following the 2004 US assaults on Fallujah, Geiger counter readings of depleted uraniums, contaminated sites in densely populated urban areas consistently show radiation levels that are between 1,000 and 2,000 times higher than normal. Now, incidentally, the UK, because apparently we have a special relationship with the US, and by that I think it means the US sees us as an uncle with special needs, who can basically always be relied to do something stupid if you tell him to, is throwing our lot in with the current proxy war that the US is fighting against Russia, and the British are now supplying depleted uranium shells to the Kiev regime so that the people in Donbass can enjoy birth defects for the next century. So, yeah, not good. All of this war, which we've had in exchange for all of this debt. And like I say, this doesn't even count that the millions of engineers, surgeons, and architects that are currently being dumped into Europe in the aftermath of this, and who are, of course, turning up in dinghies on the coast of Kent in the UK. So, fake wars, fake virus, fake riots, fake concern over fentanyl. The US government is really on a roll, and they've racked up an awful lot of money in debt, and they're a bit stuck with what to do with this, and they've reached the debt limit again. So the House, because of course they've got the House and they've got the Senate in the American system, the House is currently being controlled by Republicans, who are at least keen to present themselves as small government, and they are basically in a position, because they control the House, to hold up this debt ceiling indefinitely. And they have passed a bill to increase the debt ceiling, and it will basically cover government spending for about another year. So conveniently, the debate will be got back into fresh in people's minds for the next US presidential election, which is no doubt part of this. But in return for that additional increase in the debt ceiling, what they are asking for is a reduction in federal spending by close to $5 trillion over the next 10 years. Now, that causes the Democrats to turn to their human shield strategy, which was very much in evidence in the last situation, which I also want to talk about, which was a 2011 debt default debacle. Right, before I cover that, though, let's just rewind a little bit and go through the history of government shutdowns, because, I mean, it is important to talk about. When the debt ceiling is reached, the US has to effectively immediately stop deficit spending. And so non-essential government spending is immediately turned off. You might ask, why isn't it, if it's non-essential, why isn't it turned off all the time? The historical overview on this is that there have been 22 government shutdowns in the US since the current budgeting regime kicked in the mid-70s. And these various shutdowns have varied in length and scope. Some have lasted just a few days, some have lasted several weeks, such as the 2011 one, which we're talking about in a moment. And in fact, let's get into the 2011 one, because the standoff there was particularly significant. There was some fallout from it, which was the US was downrated by Standard & Poor's, a rating agency, for the first time ever. And even though anything more significant was avoided, it did highlight a number of problems. and the partisanship that was building up, and the pushback, because of course you had the Tea Party back then. I mean, the Democrats are always pro spending an unlimited amount, but the Tea Party were fairly active at the time. The thing that was most striking for me was the Democratic playbook, which was to use human shields.
To watch the full video, please become a premium member at lotuseaters.com.